Hi, everybody. I'm joined today by the lovely Jan Richardson-Wilde, the CEO of OAL. Jan, I know you're a very busy person, so really appreciate you taking time out to meet with us. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for asking me to do this, Sak. It's lovely.
No, do you know what, Jan? You've been one of the people that I've been really looking forward to having a sit-down session with, because over the last few years, Jan, you've been everywhere. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's not a day that I've gone onto my LinkedIn, I've not seen you or heard about the meetings that you've been involved with. So I really wanted to unpick kind of who is Jan, what are you doing? Obviously, OAL, the organization that you're CEO for, kind of their journey as well. But Jan, if I could start with, nobody wakes up as a child thinking, right, I want to be the CEO of a world-class endpoint assessment organization. If I take you back to those early years of Jan, what was the dream? What did you want to be growing up?
Well, I wanted to be a teacher in post-16 education. I wanted to be a trainer. Originally, I wanted to be working in drama.
Okay.
That was my big passion growing up, as well as that whole background of I always wanted to go into teaching and training. And I never wanted to be a primary school or a secondary school teacher. I always wanted to work in post 60. So, when I got the opportunity to do that in my mid 20s, on the west coast of Scotland, I went to be a trainer, a training advisor, it was called, on what was known as YTS programs then. I jumped at the chance and I went working for this training provider whose offices were on the bottom of Loch Lomond. So beautiful venue, lovely drive to work every day. And I absolutely loved it. And that was my start into the sector, into training. And I went from there working for a variety of training organisations for years.
Brilliant, Jan. And when you say mid-20s, I think now that couldn't have been that long ago. Surely. And Jen, I suppose that's phenomenal because, when you hear of people, and especially when they've got this admiration for teaching, it tends to be the primary schools, the secondary schools, post 16, not so much. And I suppose you're kind of figurehead and lead within that post 16 space, but you're involved in quite a bit. I mean, if we talk about OAL in a second, which we'll unpack, but also the EPO Quality Alliance, one of the co-founders there, speaking at conferences, chairing conferences. I mean, being the CEO of OAL must be quite a big task within itself. Where
Yes,
do you even get the time? And I suppose why as well, Jan?
I think it's because I really care. I'm really passionate about the sector. I've seen it from all different sides. I've had a stepson that's done apprenticeships. I've got children who've done various training. That start in Scotland, I worked with a lot of young people who hadn't had any chance in life, who had been discounted by the education system. And then when I left Scotland, I moved to the northeast of England and started working for YMCA training. And the whole ethos of the YMCA at the time was that we worked with young people out of school who had been abandoned, who had left the education system or not been supported by the education system. So therefore, in those early years, I definitely developed this passion for nobody should be left behind. Education was for all. It should be inclusive. It should meet the needs of young people. But also because I started at the very start of some of the changes to apprenticeship programs, the development of the NVQ system, sector bodies and sector councils under the training and enterprise councils, I really did a lot of work with employers and that whole employer base, and was very tied into, well, what is it employers need? What do young people need to be able to get employed and move into permanent employment and be able to grow within that? And also, I ended up having a conventional pathway myself to where I was at that point. And what I mean by that is, I'd done the traditional things at school. I'd done my O-levels, I'd done my A-levels, but then instead of going to university, which is what I wanted to do at the time, I ended up putting it all on pause because I had a couple of children and got married. And so it wasn't until much later that I went back into education myself and got a degree, then got various other qualifications as time went on, and really got hooked into that whole belief in lifelong learning, and that you can completely, change where you've started off, that I was told when I was younger, having grown up in the 60s and 70s, women tended to have children and stop work a lot of the time still. They didn't end up managers and directors of organisations. But what I grew into was somebody who believed that that was possible for everybody if you were given the right life chances, if you were given the right information and the right support. Because I'd made it happen for me and I wanted to make it happen for other people.
I love that, Jan. I love that. And now that you've kind of opened up and showed us a little bit more about your background, I can see where that deep-rooted passion comes from. It's not just a profession. You're a lived version of, what could happen. Because you're right, 60s, 70s, that was very much the norm for most, wasn't it? And also I think I love the fact that it's not just something that you do, it's your family, they've gone through that process as well, you coming back into this lifelong bit, and the tri-party relationship. It's not just 100% big focus on the learners, but actually there's employers involved there. And I think with we'll talk about it more when we talk about OAL, but that tri-party relationship that really shines through there. And so Jan, if we fast forward a little bit then, so I suppose, back when you started at OAL, endpoint assessments would have still relatively have been new. You've come from a training background yourself, working for providers and colleges. Why OAL? Because I'm guessing back then, OAL is a household brand now. Everybody's known, seen, and experienced OAL in some capacity, be that in a networking event or a conference. But back then, I picture OAL would have been a very different organisation. So what made you think, that's where I'll call home for a bit?
Well, it's one of those really kind of, I suppose people would call it luck things that happen in life. But I always think that some things that happen in life are definitely under your control. We get presented with opportunities, but it's how we respond to those opportunities, because there's always one of two ways that you could go with any opportunity that comes forward. As it was, I had reached a time in my life where I wanted to stop working for training providers or colleges and move to what I called the other side of the fence. I wanted to do something else. And I had an idea that I kind of wanted to work for an awarding or endpoint assessment organisation, because it wasn't like I'd had an epiphany and I suddenly wanted to go and work in India or something like that, where some people completely change what they do. I wanted to change what I was doing, but I wanted to still keep it within the same type of work, to use the skills and the knowledge and the experience that I had, and do it differently. And as it would happen, I'd kind of stopped working for a few months because my husband had had a heart attack, and I knew I wanted to be nearer home. And I had a phone call from a recruitment company who said this job had come up. Would I be interested in having a chat with them? They were based in York. That meant that it was fairly near to home. And they would be interested in having a CEO. And as I've said to you before, Sak, I had never heard of the company. So I was a bit like, well, I've lived around here for 30 years and worked in Yorkshire and the Humber myself, and I don't know who they are. Well, I went along to have the chat, and I thought this has got something. This is really interesting. It was a great opportunity from the point of view of, becoming the CEO, because I'd kind of got to that point in my life where I'd been a director at Interserve for quite a number of years, as Director of Quality and Curriculum. And to be quite honest, Interserve had 7,000 apprentices, over 10,000 adult learners. And after I'd taken Interserve through inspection, I was a little bit, don't think I want to do that anymore. that was quite a lot to have to do. I kind of like the whole ethos of OAL. The fact that at the time it was owned by the National Skills Academy for Food and Drink, it had a strong employer base through that relationship with the National Skills Academy. I liked the culture. It reminded me of YMCA training, which I worked at for 7 years. And I loved being at the YMCA. Brilliant charity, does lots of work with young people, which is fantastic. And I kind of felt a similar ethos at OAL. Thought this is really interesting. It kind of draws on all my skills. There was the emerging endpoint assessment, the development of the curriculum and the endpoint assessments. I'd got a strong background in assessment. We had a lovely team. We were working with employers and a variety of training providers. And I knew about systems and processes and how to bring the whole thing together. And I thought, this is a really good opportunity. I need to give it a go. And therefore, I said yes when at the end of the first couple of meetings, they said they wanted to offer me the role. And really, it's gone from there. When one of the key things for me was, how do we ensure we work closely with those employers, build fantastic customer service and high quality endpoint assessment activity, but also, ensure that we still remain true to our values, but raise that brand profile so that everybody isn't going, who are OAL, like I did. They know who we are, and they know what we do, and they know what we stand for.
And Jan, I have to say this because I wrote it down as you were saying it, and you mentioned about luck in the beginning, and I have to say, only probably from personal experience as well, but I find the harder you work, the luckier you get, and you definitely fall into that category for me there, Jan. And I love your openness. I've done some talks around, how do you become agile and responsive, and a lot of it is being open to having those conversations, because I suppose that chat those years ago to where you've got to now by just saying I'll explore, massive. And also your quality background, and I think now that you've mentioned that as well, I can see it, because we're fortunate enough to work with OAL, so I get to see it from first-hand experience, but really resonates and comes through. So Jan, if we do, I suppose, stay in where we're at right now, and you've just joined OAL. So who were they when you joined? Kind of how many standards were they doing? What did it look like?
Well, we were very small. We shared quite a lot of staff with the National Skills Academy for Food and Drink, because we were very, very interlinked with them. And it's not that we're not now, but what we agreed with the board was we'd got a CEO of the National Skills Academy and a CEO of OAL, and that we would gradually, over my first year, separate out the two companies. So I had some key staff that stayed with me, Lee Reddington, as you'll have met, and Phil Clough. They helped me build OAL for what it is today, along with then the staff we have brought in over those 3-4 years or so, such as Zach and Debs and Sunot and people like that. And they've been the core team as we've gradually grown and expanded out from the 20 standards that we were approved for back at the end of 2019 when I came into the company, to the 43 standards we're now approved for. And we've kind of expanded out from what we focused on, which was food and drink and the few furniture standards, up across the board into lots of other standards, creative and craft, business and administration and things like that. The board wanted to grow the company as well as develop the ethos of the company. They wanted us to implement systems and processes, which was just as well, Sak, because within 3 months of properly getting into the job, we went into COVID-19 and complete lockdown, and we delivered everything face to face with very few technological support systems in place at that time, as did a lot of other companies. We forget 100%. That 4.5 years ago. So my first year was very much focused on implementing technology, implementing a variety of systems, developing and growing the business, raising the brand, but also changing a lot of our systems and processes so that we could adapt how we did endpoint assessment. We could adapt how we worked with all our customers and employers and be able to, through that whole change process, have a business that was responsive and flexible, but offered a completely hybrid system moving forward.
No, and you know what, Jen, actually, you're so right there, because when you said it, you probably saw the shock in my face, because you're absolutely right. And if I look at some of the standards that you guys would have done back then, those original 20, a lot of them were technical, hands-on, and it's not just you're starting a new role, it's almost you've got to start a whole new function, processes, ways of doing things, because it was so face-to-face before. You probably saw me smile there, Jan, when you mentioned Lee, Phil, Zach and the team, because again, I've had the pleasure of working with them and it's so great. All of them are so great. And which brings me on to kind of, you've talked a lot about culture and ethos, both when we were talking about Jan in those early years and OAL when you started, and something you're clearly proud of. Just talk to me about what that is and how have you got there? Because I know a lot of providers and organizations struggle with that a bit, don't they?
Yes, one of the things, because we didn't have our own strategic objectives and values, and we very much, because we were part of the National Skills Academy, had their mission and vision. One of the things I did at our very first away day was involve the whole team on who is OAL? What's our main purpose? What should our mission and vision be? What should our values be? Because I've always strongly believed that if you want to be the right organisation and you want those values and objectives and strategies to be not just led from the top, but lived and breathed by everybody else, then they've got to be part of it. So we built together what we wanted that to be. And to be quite honest, we reviewed them, would you believe, at every away day at the end of every year. The one we have a couple of away days a year for the whole team, where we do lots of activities and have a laugh and some nice food and do some activities to ensure the team are all of one voice and we're all up to date with what we're doing, but also part of where we're going. And that has helped us become, I think, the organisation we are today. So lots of things in our straplines, such as support, succeed, surpass, that was created by Lee and Zach. Our values of expertise, honesty, integrity, responsibility, being inclusive, wanting to be flexible and collaborative, they're all what the staff believe we should be doing. And therefore, we've been able to build that culture into how we work. We want to be the people's EPAO. We want to ensure that we give that personalised service, that if you phone us up, somebody will answer the phone and talk to you and support you in solving your problem or answering your question or giving you support. We never want to actually, and this is part of our strategy, be too big that we can't do that we can't meet the needs effectively of our customers and the apprentices and learners that we want to put into the heart of everything that we do.
I love that, Jan. And actually, I want to open up a little bit about what you mean by customers, because in the past, when we were talking earlier, you talked about that tripartite relationship. You've got the learners, you've got the providers, you've got the employers, and so when you say customers, who would you say are your main customers? Do you see that as a learner? Do you see it as the college or training provider, as the employer, all three of them? And how does that work so symbiotically?
I think, if I'm being honest, it's all three of them. The ones that we have the most interaction with, though, are the training providers and the employers, depending on what the standard is. with some standards, particularly some of the food and drink ones, a lot of our large employers such as Coca-Cola, Nestle, Haribo, they've got us on speed dial, absolutely on speed dial. So we've got very strong relationships with some big companies out there. However, over the last 4 years, partly because of my background and a number of the people in the team, Lee, Sue, Phil, and others, they come from a training provider background. And one of the things I noticed with awarding organisations sometimes is that the people that work in them haven't always worked on the other side of the fence. You remember me mentioning that at the beginning? But we all come from training provision. So quite a lot of what we looked at and how we worked, we said, well, that might be great for us, but we don't think that's great for our training providers and our colleges. In order to get the best relationship with them and meet their needs, we need to do things a bit differently. And I think that has become a kind of keynote part of some of the work I've done over the last 3 or 4 years with the team, and that the team have done in changing how OAL worked from when I took over as CEO and how we work now. We definitely are very tied in to the key part of the customer chain, which is the training providers and colleges. What do they need? What do they need from us to be able to do their job well when it comes to qualifications and endpoint assessment? What do they need to prepare their apprentices and their learners well for the qualifications and endpoint assessment? And also, what do those learners and apprentices need? So we're focused very much on that whole journey of the 3 parts of the customer triangle.
Jan, that's gold for me, because I think so much, and I'm probably guilty of this sometimes when I think about the recruitment business or EPA Hub, but to get so wrapped up in our own worlds that sometimes we forget the needs of the people that we're servicing. And actually what you described there, I love, because it's if colleges and training providers don't find it easy, meaningful, valuable, why would they want to come and work with you? And actually, Jenny, it doesn't just stop there, does it? For, I suppose, anyone who's listening who's not familiar with the emergency framework that you guys are part of, just how would you describe that? Because I think that's a massive thing that you guys are doing for the industry, not just, I suppose, for OAL. So what is the emergency framework?
Well, it's something that the Department for Education put in place to be able to support endpoint assessment organisations that decided through a number of government changes or policy changes, or because they didn't want to do endpoint assessment anymore, might leave the market. And therefore, that meant that those standards that they were supporting apprentices with did not have an endpoint assessment organisation. So 3 years ago, we bid to go on the framework so that when an endpoint assessment organisation leaves the marketplace, we're one of only 4 endpoint assessment companies that are sent the list of standard and asked if we would like to bid to be able to deliver that. And through that process, we have taken on lots of different divergent standards from when we started. Some of them are quite niche, such as rehabilitation worker visual impairment. Completely different. Had a conversation with the ESFA and DFE, and they asked us if we would consider taking that standard on. But it's been a great standard to work on, and it's completely changed our perspective and meant that we looked at some other things differently. For example, we had our assessors who now do rehabilitation work for us do an assessment of our website and our materials for their readability for people who were visually impaired. So, we've moved into the marine standards or what I lovingly call them the boats. When I mentioned to the board, we're going to move away from food and drink and do some marine standards, they were slightly surprised, but they did back me. And that's been a great experience. And those kind of things really make you want to get out of bed in the morning and come to work because it's different and it's challenging and it's interesting. But also, if you think you're making a difference, that there's nothing better than that.
Yeah. And you can tell, Jan, it's evident that you're very much purpose-led by passion, which I think's admirable. Because, and again, I'm just an assumption here, but some of those standards, as you mentioned, are so niche and may or may not attract volume. From an OAL perspective, was there an element of risk? There's definitely an element of investment, but the fact that I almost feel like you stood up when there was a gap for a hero and decided actually OAL is going to fill that void, because as learners at the end of this that need endpoint assessment, there's no one there to support them, which then I suppose links back to your own personal early days where you thought, well, actually, who was there to stand up for Jan when the status quo was 60s, 70s, you've had your little ones, crack on. So I love all that. And then, Jan, I've got to speak a bit about OAL, because I think most people will know Jan, they will know OAL, but if they wanted to know a little bit more about OAL, you mentioned 43 standards, which clearly puts you in the upper quartile of endpoint assessment organisations based on standards. But if I could, Jan, just read out some of the sectors that you operate in for anyone who doesn't know. So you've got food and drink, so where it all kind of started from. You've got the business and management suite, furniture, craft and creative, engineering and manufacturing, marine, process and improvement, retail, trade, supply chain, and then all your specialist support that you mentioned you've picked up. So, Jan, that's a wide range of standards that you operate there. If there was a college or a training provider out there that had heard of OAL, had seen you, but not necessarily used you as an endpoint assessment organisation yet, what's the best way to reach out or engage with OAL?
Well, you can get directly in touch with us through our customer service email. So directly to our customer service team, who will ensure that anybody's query is directed to the right place. You can get in touch with me directly. A lot of people do, but they get in touch with Lee directly as well, because Lee Reddington, as our Director of Partnerships, deals with all our initial customer queries and speaks to those customers. Like I said at the beginning, we very much give a personalised touch.
And just vouch for that, because all the work that we've done together, the whole team, very much friendly, professional, always on point. But I think the key word is accessible. Like, I know if I need to get hold of OAL, there's Jan, there's Lee, there's Phil, there's Zach, and everyone's so welcoming to having a conversation. And I suppose, Jen, I have to touch upon this as well, because you mentioned some major brands there, Coca-Cola, Nestle, them being on speed dial. What is it about your service, I suppose, that makes organisations of that scale, size and grandeur see you as a key part of their supply chain?
I think it is our responsiveness, our flexibility, the fact that we listen to what they're saying and we do something about it, that they can work with us collaboratively, that we're friendly, like you say, and that we're accessible all the time to them, and that we work with them on each aspect of their apprenticeship journey. We'll give them support. They'll ring us for questions. We'll liaise with their training providers for them, and we'll bring them all together and give them what they need to ensure that they're succeeding as well as we're succeeding.
Brilliant. And Jan, I suppose parting words or messages to training providers from you who may or may not have used you guys yet, what would you say to them?
Come and have a conversation with us and find out what we do and what support we could give you in order for you to be able to achieve your goals.
Fantastic. Jan, honestly, an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed this. And for all the viewers as well, the links, the email addresses that Jan's mentioned, they'll all be in the post here. But Jan, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you guys very soon.